Hi, today's date is September 13th. It's Friday, 2002. And we're here with Mom and Alice, and we're just doing a conversation talking about her memories. Tell us about Newark, New Jersey.
In Newark, New Jersey, I remember that we lived near J. Wisson Sons. And when you faced the factory, on the right side was a family named White, W-H-I-T-E, and they had 9 children. And then on the other side, my family lived, and we became friends with the Whites. And there were a lot of memories with them when I think of it. I went with the one that was named Betty, and she had the horrible nickname Googie. When she became a teenager, she says, if anyone calls me that, I will not answer Googie.
You used to call me Googie.
Yeah, you used to call us Guga.
But they were Googie. She was Googie.
What did you do with Betty?
Well, she was, she thought of things that if you asked your mother, should you do it, she'd probably say no. Like, like she would say, we could go on the bus over town and get free Santa Claus bus books. So I was a follower. I went with her. And I remember there was a lot of people, and we did go to the store, and we did get a Santa Claus book to take home. And Googie, Betty, said, we don't have to pay because we're little.
So what happened? Did your mom notice these books?
No.
You hid them from her?
Oh, my mother didn't know what we did. But anyway,
You little rascal.
when we were getting off the bus, the driver said to me, you didn't pay, and I looked at him very frightened. What was I going to do? But he let me get off, though. Your mother gave you money and you spent it, he said. And that's a little episode I remember.
Okay. Do you remember when Aunt Helen was born?
Oh, and another thing we did was, she would say, oh, I know where there's an amusement park. They had an old Ford, a canvas on the top, and if it rained, you put up material on the sides of it for rain. That was the kind of Ford they had. We would go to a park, and they had a lot of things to do. I know where it is, Googie said. So I went with her. We walked and we walked and we walked, and finally she said, well, I guess this isn't the way. And we were very tired, so there was a man, we asked him if he had a nickel for the trolley or the bus, because it was so far back. And he was a kindly man, and he said, oh, don't you know they say you could walk a mile for a camel? That didn't mean anything to us. We were little and we weren't interested in Camel cigarettes. But he must have given us a nickel because we rode home. When we came home and we went to her house, our mothers were together, and they didn't even say, what have you been doing?
As long as you came home.
They saw us and they didn't question what were you doing.
How old do you think you were when you were doing these little things, trips? 8 years old, younger?
Yeah, maybe around then.
Okay. So your mom didn't worry? What? Didn't ask questions? She trusted you? Okay.
So we'll go to the next thing.
All right. Do you remember when Aunt Ruth was born?
Hey, I don't remember when Helen was born, but Aunt Willie said she remembers.
Yeah.
And the doctor came. And at that time, I thought when they had a satchel, the baby, if you had a baby, it was in the satchel.
Oh.
And she wanted to go in, and he says, you wait out here.
Oh, so she was born at home.
She must, yeah, she was born
she
at
must
home.
have been born at home.
And Willie said she wanted to peek in the keyhole, but he put something over the keyhole. Isn't that
he was
funny?
smart.
She remembers that?
Oh, wow.
I think she said she was about 6, so that meant I was about 4.
Wow.
I don't remember that at all.
No. Oh.
And you thought the babies came in the doctor's satchel?
Oh, that's
Something like
cute.
that.
But now you know differently, right?
Oh, yeah, 'cause I had 4.
You know where they came, how they got there. Okay, move on now. How about Aunt Ruth? Do you remember anything about her?
I remember Aunt Ruth, it seemed like it was depression and times were hard. And my mother wasn't that strong. I think they said she was anemic. But anyway, she was born and everything was fine. And I remember one instance, we lived in a flat and the only heat was in the kitchen. This was popular for most working class people to just have heat in the kitchen. And Ruth was in a little baby, maybe 11 months old, sitting in the carriage, and my father hadn't gone to work yet. She was eating a piece of toast, so I bent over and asked her for a bite, and she handed it to me. But what happened was I bit a finger because it was soft as toast. And then she cried, and my father hadn't gone to work yet, and he said, "What did you do? What did you do?" And then he was going to give me a licking.
Uh-oh.
Oh.
But it was early in the morning, he was getting ready for work, and so I could run around the rooms in a circle, so after he gave up with a knee, because he had to go to work, and by the time he came back, he forgot to give me a licking. But you know, it was an accident when I bit her finger.
Yes.
She should have moved it when I was biting.
How old were you though when she was born? Because
Yeah,
and
there's
you
a
were running
space.
around the table from your father?
You were, how old were you? Like how many
There's
years?
13 years difference.
Whoa, so you were a preteen when that happened.
Preteens then weren't like now.
Oh, well.
When I was
But they
13
could
years
run.
old, and my mother said, "What would you like for your birthday?" And I said, "I'd like a doll."
Yeah, right.
Oh.
And she says, "But you're kind of old now." And I says, "But I want a doll." But when my birthday came, there was no doll. And I cried and I said I wanted a doll. So I remember she disappeared from the house and she went somewhere and she came back with a big mama doll. And most of all, what I liked, I could sew bigger dresses. I loved to sew. And I was around 5 years old when I began sewing for little tiny dolls they sold. They were celluloid, and they would cost 5 cents. And I would make little socks and little outfits. And as I sewed more, I would get bigger dolls and do more decorations on them, and I felt very thrilled about that.
Mm.
And then I used to sew for my sister Ruth. Oh, I also sewed for my other sisters. I remember making Willie dresses, and I tried to make them look very professional with trimmings, and I would bring them over town to Singer's for hem stitching to give it that final expert look. And one time my father gave me a pinking shear, and I took delight in doing the inside to make it look really professional. And when Doris and Alice went to a dance prom or something at a Christmas dance at Stratford High, I made them each a velvet dress.
That was for
That was
church.
just a Christmas dress,
Oh, I made a Christmas dress.
because I never went to dances.
Oh. Doris had like a robin blue for the month of September, and
Yeah.
Alice had green. I can remember the
I
dresses now.
remember it now.
And Alice got a compliment. Her friend said, "Where'd you buy the dress?" And she said, "In Emma's shoppy." And she says, "Where's that?" And she says, "It was my mother."
And remember, you made a skirt, an overskirt of
Netting.
netting for it.
Later, to make it for a more festive occasion, I had a crinoline, the same color material to go over it that you would drape around your waist and tie it when you wished to wear it. I was very pleased with how it came. I also would sew coats and hats for the girls as they grew, and I took delight in making pouch bags. I would save an oatmeal box and cut it down. Then I would line it and put piping in between and a drawstring, and it really looked like it was bought from exclusive shop. And I met some women who used to like to sew, and they had patterns like for a tam or for a Scotty hat. So I made those too, and I would line them and do professional touchings on it.
Were you self-taught?
It was, well, I went to sewing in school, but I used my imagination to be creative or to switch parts from one pattern to another or add my little touch. And later, when Doris and Alex went to school, I would go to the store and get different color materials, and after I would sew the dresses, I didn't know how to make buttonholes. So my mother-in-law would be sitting with me, and I would ask her, would she do the buttonholes? And I think she was proud that I was able to sew, because she would do a lot of sewing for her children and take older clothing and make them into something for the boys. So I think she enjoyed what I did. And I went to Bullard Haven and learned how to make slip covers. And I had been visiting somewhere, Laughlander from Brooklyn, and I liked her slip covers, so I remembered how it was mentally, so that when I made them my color, but the way hers were, and they came out real professional. Especially when I went to Bullard Havens and learned a few tips on piping and zippers and stuff. But it was time consuming. I do remember one thing. When I lived on Dover Street, Doris was like maybe 2 or 3, and I was cutting material for a chair, and as I was bent over the chair, she crept in, so that when she raised her head hit my face and my eyeglass broke. I had rimless eyeglasses, so that was the end of the sewing. It cost 5 cents to go on the Barnum State bus to get my eyeglasses fixed. Well, don't you know, when I was all ready to sew again, it happened a second time. The exact thing.
Oh.
So after that, I never wore rimless glasses again. I always had frames, and they proved very sturdy.
Wow.
That was why I never wore rimless after.
Wow. Now, let's get back to a memory of your sisters and brother. Do you remember your twin sisters and your brother Bob? What can you tell us about them when they were born?
What I remember most about the twins were, one, there was sorrow in the house I saw, and I was pretty young.
Were they born before Aunt Helen or
after Aunt Helen?
after Aunt Helen? Okay.
Well, one had died, and the baby was being buried. And then my mother brought me over to the wicker baby carriage and said, look, the other baby had died, and she was laying there, and she had white long stockings, and one leg was like crossed over. She had died. But I just remember going to the first one funeral.
What did they die of?
They called it summer complaint. I think it was some kind of diarrhea thing, and they don't know much about it. Today they probably would have cured it. Their names were Alice and Ella.
Was there anyone in the family named Alice? Why did she choose Alice? Did she have a sister named Alice?
I guess it was just the name she must have liked.
Oh, and how about Ella?
Same thing.
Same thing. Do you remember your mother talking about her sisters? Of course, we have a tape with Grandma talking about her family. Do you remember her talking about her family? Her mother and father?
Well, her life, I believe, was kind of hard growing up. Her father also went to the United States while she was there with a stepmother. She also told me there was no church in her community, her village they called it. A priest would travel to different areas, and that was what she had.
So she was,
I think her childhood was rough.
Yeah. So she was brought up Catholic?
Well, like I said, only a priest came through,
Okay.
so that was what it was.
How about when you were a little girl? Did she take you to church?
Well, when my parents married my mother, church was important to my mother, so she always took us from as long as I could ever remember. And I remember when holidays came, especially Christmas, how they would get busy with the children to have programs about the birth of Christ. And then after church, during the church service, they would go in the congregation and give out candy boxes to children in the audience. And when I was too young for Sunday school, I would get one, and it was sure nice to find the chocolate pieces. I remember that good. But I remember every Christmas we would all get a new dress. One year, two of my sisters got royal blue and it had red piping, but they didn't have my size, so I had a forest green with gold piping. I thought mine was the prettiest. So then I had the habit that I would make dresses for Doris and Alice when Christmas came for the Christmas programs. One time I made them a dress and I said to their father, gee, a locket would go nice with this neckline. And I didn't think anything of it. So when he came back from the store one day, what do you think he had? 2 lockets for them, one for each. Where are they now? I don't know.
I'll have to look in my jewelry box.
Me too.
Oh.
Oh, and then I remember I made a rust-colored jumper for each one, and I borrowed the
It's corduroy.
pattern. It was corduroy.
Yeah.
I loved them, and they were so... Did you like them?
I think we wore them a lot.
And I think you made a little bag too, like you did with the oatmeal box, only this was lined with plastic, and we would have to bring our little
Yes.
milk bottle glass for snack time at school.
But they would break.
They would break because you know how kids are with swinging it around.
I remember that. Doris had carried her milk to school because I had this plastic lined purse. But one day it seems it was broken, so after that, I didn't do that. She bought the milk in school. You never objected that you didn't like not buying it in school?
No.
Kids didn't seem to object. They took what was given to them dutifully, and they didn't make no big noises. One day, when Doris was in kindergarten, there was a boy who would chase her home on his bicycle. She told me about it, and I says, well, run up on somebody's porch. So one day she told me she had to do that. So I felt I had enough of this, so I went to the neighbor's house. And the woman says to the boy, did you chase this child with your bike? And he hung his head, and he never did it again. He was just a mischievous little normal boy.
Right.
And that was the end of that.
How about when you went to school? Remember anything about your early years in school? Your teachers?
Oh, I remember one specific time I had a boo-boo on the top of my head.
How'd you get that?
How I got it, it was Sunday, Mother's Day, and I was 13 years old, and I says, I'll never forget this holiday, Mother's Day, and I'm 13. I had come from church, and I had a light green hat with the brim. They wore them a lot in those days. And it seemed I still had it on. But some neighborhood kids and I were going to play hide and seek before Sunday dinner. And as I ran against a house, you know how you go up and down when you run. Well, when I went up, my head got in contact with an end of a rusty staircase that you push up and down by a house for a fire.
Fire escape, yeah.
A fire escape thing. And I took my hat off, and there was blood on my head, so I put my hat back on and ran home. I didn't even tell the friends I ran home. Wonder how long they looked for me. But I ran.
If they played hide and seek.
I ran home, and my mother took me to emergency.
She's still finding.
It was on a Sunday, and we went on the Barnum State bus. I think my father was in Waterbury. He was an itinerant knife sharpener at the time. It was Depression, and he earned wages that way. He would sharpen knives and scissors, and he would travel a bit and usually end up in Cheshire or Waterbury, so he wasn't home. But I could remember how that was. But they had to shave the top of my head like as much as the small saucer. And when they bandaged my head, it looked like I had a fractured skull. So I wore a hat in the house. And then a week later, I had to get stitches out. And then we would have homework. And I had this teacher, Mrs. Holmberg. And when I got the stitches out, I didn't bring my homework when I went back to school because I figured I would miss it, but I didn't. So when she was called, she said, if I don't call your name that you handed in your homework, don't join the class, do the homework. So I didn't say anything. I had to do the homework. And of course, when they took the stitches out, the patch on my head wasn't covered, and it probably had me mercurochrome and didn't look too happy. And so I guess the teacher noticed it enough to be conscience-stricken. And we used to pass from one class to another in a different room. And as I passed, she called me out of line and asked me what happened to my head. And I told her quickly something. And then she said, but you did do your homework. And I says, I left it home. So she says, well, we go home for lunch, so when you come back, you could bring it. And I think it bothered her that I had to do my homework in class when I had a good reason why I didn't have it. It was home. And I had this her bad-looking head. From then on, I was her special friend. I was her special friend. She was always extra nice to me. And I was a little bit well-fed looking, but I don't think I would say I was fat. But then the next year I went on another floor because for that class, and I got thin. And she was a little startled how different I looked and asked me about how I was. But her name was Miss Holmberg.
Hmm.
That was an episode I remember well.
Hmm. Do you remember when you moved from Newark to Bridgeport? Why did you move?
It was depression during, and work was poor. And my father had worked, he had been working in Jaywith and Sons in New Jersey, but he thought he could get a job in Bridgeport, which he did, Acme Shear.
Oh.
So that was why they moved.
Oh.
And we let him find the rent. Actually, men have a different idea when they find a rent compared to how the women are. But once you're settled, you're not so quick to move again. So we lived on Crescent Avenue.
In Bridgeport.
In Bridgeport. And it turned out that we went to Barnes School, but we were not in the right district.
Mm-hmm.
We weren't really in the right district to go there, but we were accepted. But it happened when Helen was going to Barnes School. A girlfriend was going to Waltersville, and she wanted her there. So she said, my girlfriend's out of the district.
Oh.
So because we weren't moving into the district, she had to go there.
Hmm. Hmm. And you must have walked to school, right?
We walked to school, and we walked to school to high school, and it was a good walk. You could take a bus, it was 5 cents. 5 cents was a lot to a family.
Yeah.
We thought nothing of walking. Walking is what you do to get there. We never thought that you could get a ride.
Where's Crescent Avenue? I don't...
It was off East Main Street by
Oh.
the Brass Company.
Okay. And then you moved to East Main.
Then later, Willie had a girlfriend, Wilma Wolfram, and she was part owner of a house on East Main Street over a grill, and they had many more rooms, so we moved there. And my brother Bob was a little boy. I had my first job, and I think I was 18 or 19, and he was 4 months old when I worked.
Oh. So he was born in Bridgeport.
Yeah.
And Aunt Ruth, was she born in Bridgeport too?
Yeah, she was born in Bridgeport.
In the hospital?
Yeah.
Okay. So the doctor didn't bring them in a black bag?
No.
Okay.
I don't think I ever thought about that part.
No. Can you tell us something a little personal? Like, how did you learn about where babies really came from? Did your mom have a talk with you?
No.
No.
They didn't talk to you in those days. Not, at least my mother. I found it after I got married.
Get out.
Oh.
The whole thing was a surprise.
Oh. Okay, let's move on.
Okay.
Okay, so now you got your first job. Where was your first job?
I worked in Park Bay Company. It's a division of Park and Davis Surgical.
Oh, yeah.
And once jobs weren't too easy to get, my mother was on the Barnum State bus, and this strange lady sat next to her, and they were chatting, and the lady was saying that this company, Bay Company, she worked there at times, and they had some orders. It was a good place to work. My mother told me about it, and once I found out where it was, I went every single day. And my mother said the boss's name was Mr. Gunzenhauser, and I took German in school, high school, so saying Mr. Gunzenhauser wasn't bad. So I would come in and ask for Mr. Gunzenhauser, and the janitor would go up and get him, and he would come down with a shift of papers in his hands he was working with. And he said to me, "How did you know my name was Mr. Gunzenhauser?" So I said how my mother was talking with this lady. "And why do you want to work here?" And I said, "What is your interest here?" And I says, "Well, I heard that when you have a job, you're got to be prepared to work and hang in there and do it." So I went there every single day. Later on, I found that you call him Mr. Gun. Later, I called him that.
Because you got hired.
You got hired.
Well,
So he hired you because of what you said?
I was persistent.
Yeah.
Got sick of
I think I was
having to go up
so
and down.
persistent. Well, finally they got an order, and he hired me.
Oh.
And they put me onto this work, and my father always said, "You gotta put out so much work," and all that kind of thing. So I worked very quickly, and I made over the rate that was expected. And Mr. Gunn said, "Did you get any help?" And I said, "No, I did it myself." So I had already made the rate, and I just got hired. But all the girls were talking, "How come he hired somebody? We don't have much work, and he hires someone." So of course I didn't last long. I got laid off. But he told me that he would, when work came in, he would rehire me, which he did. So in between I did housework. That was about what you could get mostly.
And did
Minding a little boy.
and you met somebody who worked at the Bay Company named Martha.
Oh. When I went to the Bay Company and was employed, when I put my time card on the rack, I noticed the name Lagerfeldt, and it struck me because I took German in high school. And then I did meet Martha Lagerfeldt, and she had a brother named Carl, and Carl wanted to meet a young lady, and he would see me walking at lunchtime with this friend Eleanor DeLugas. And one time my church was, and also I became friends with Martha Lagerfeldt. And St. Paul's Church was having a minstrel show that I was on, and they would sell tickets. So I asked Martha if she was interested in her twin sister Margaret. So they both came, plus her brother Carl. Then after her church had a strawberry festival, and they sold tickets. In their church, they didn't do minstrels and things like that, but this time they were selling tickets because the ladies wanted to do the kitchen over in church. And you should see the strawberries. I don't know how they made any profit. It was loaded. Big, luscious strawberries and whipped cream. And I went with Will. Then when we came out, these fellas were outside standing, Ray Hendrickson and Carl and some other fellas. And then Carl came up to me, and then he asked would I like to go out the next day. And he had a car. So I says, okay. So that was the beginning of us going out. We went to a circus, then we went for a ride. And then his mother made delicious soup that was really yummy and out of this world.
Chicken soup?
Other kinds too.
Oh.
She made real good soup. And sometime he and Martha would go home for lunch when she made it. I wasn't invited at that time. He didn't know me that well.
Okay.
And that was how we met.
Okay.
And Ray, when we got married, Ray Hendrickson was in our wedding party. And Dan Olson, I became friends with his sister, Agnes Luthers. And then Dan married Betty Krachak. And
How about when you got engaged? How long did you date him? Couple of years?
no,
No. Short?
maybe a year.
Oh.
But way back when people came from the old country, they'd get married in 6 weeks.
Yeah.
And they would just about get their next week pay.
Wow.
That was how they did it.
So what do you remember about getting engaged and planning your wedding?
I know when I got the ring, I was a nervous wreck when I thought of it. I think I had got it December the 12th.
Oh.
But what happened was, after I was married one day, I didn't know that you should have your diamond checked. The diamond fell out of the engagement ring. And I put it away in a box underneath the lining. And when I was going to go to have it taken care of, it wasn't there. And that was the end of the ring.
Oh.
I had the ring with no stone.
The engagement ring. Oh.
The diamond wasn't there?
It disappeared from the box it was in. I think I was the first one of my group to get married.
Didn't Dad go into service for a while? Was that before you were married or after?
I think we were engaged and then he went into service. But then they felt he had heart murmurs, and so they said that he could come out. So then after he came out, a few months later, we got married.
Oh.
But when he came home from camp, he looked like he'd been on a big vacation, because he had to just rest around till the government gave him his papers, and he was looking real good.
Oh. And what did he do for a living?
He worked in Beard Machine.
Oh.
He worked on Beard Machine and did precision grinding. He had to do it like 1/8 of an inch.
Yeah.
But he was strong in his Christian faith, and people knew when they approached around his machine, he didn't tell them risque jokes or show risque pictures around your machine. And no matter what happened, this was his testimony, and they all respected it because he'd let them have it.
Oh.
They
Knew him.
They knew he wouldn't be happy with them, so they respected him.
Oh.
And when he passed away, one friend, I have to think what was his name, he says, "Your husband was a beacon at his machine." He said, he shone as a beacon at his machine, and he stood for what he believed no matter what. And he had a great Elmer Thompson, his name was, and he stayed at the funeral parlor all that day thinking about it. And now I'm thinking, what will they say about me when I'm gone? You leave a mark from your life, on your attitudes in your life and what is our mark that we're leaving.
So tell us about when you got married. What do you remember about that day? Who was there at your wedding? And
Oh, when I got married, I thought it was so great. I made a scrapbook. And I took notes on the honeymoon because I knew I'd forget later. And as soon as I came home, I wrote up from all those notes and had pictures and stuff there. And now the book is 59 years old.
yeah,
Isn't that something?
yeah.
We were thinking the pages could be laminated because they're getting dry and brittle.
Oh, so that's a good project.
But when I look at my wedding picture, most of the people passed away. But Nellie Varholic is living, Willie and me, but all the men have died, and Aunt Helen. So that leaves Willie and Nellie. Nellie goes to Baldwin.
Oh,
She doesn't look much different from when I remember her way back. I met Nellie in Barnes School. Her parents could no longer afford to pay for parochial school, and they had 4 boys besides her own being the only girl. So she came to Barnes School. I could still see the dress she had and the cape kind of sleeves on it. And I believe she was 13. I knew her from then.
oh, and you stayed friends all those years.
After marriage, somehow things happen. You have a new life and things to do. And sometimes you're not as close as you were. But she married and had 1 daughter, but her daughter died when she was 16 years old. She had some kind of disease that affected the muscle, and of course the heart was a muscle, and she knew that her daughter's time might be short.
Oh.
And then her husband later died of cancer. But she's very happy looking, and she says, you just let go and let God, and life goes on from there. And she looks quite happy in her life.
Want to stop here? Want to stop here? You getting tired of talking?
No.
No? Whoa.
Once you get
You're on a roll. Okay. Tell us about your wedding reception. Was it held at the church, or did you go to a restaurant?
For the wedding, I really want to go to Mary Journey's Inn, but it wasn't available. And the idea is if they weren't available, why didn't I look somewhere else? But instead, I had them do the meal in our church basement. So my husband and I met that morning, and we went in the church basement, and we decorated the tables and fixed everything up. And then when we were satisfied, we went home to get ready for our wedding.
Oh.
And Wilma Wolfram, she became Nettleton. Wilma Wolfram was going to drive me to the church, and her aunt said, of all people, she asked you, you're always late.
That's true.
But I want to tell you, she wasn't late. She got me there.
Whoa.
But I do remember it very clearly when I was in the waiting room waiting for it to begin, and then the music and all. It was such a happy, clean feeling of knowing you were doing it God's way. And that feeling followed me all through the honeymoon when we were on the train and all. We had this presence as we were so happy and smiling together, but there was this presence with us. And I know there was a lot of prayer, and God was really with us in it. It was a wonderful time. I remember that very greatly. And and my mother-in-law was going to make her home with us, and I made a pact with God that that she would feel that she was part of our home, and that with a little doing, I feel that she did feel our home was her home. And when she visited her daughters, she would talk proudly of our children. She'd say, our children. And I think maybe some members of the family didn't get so happy about it, that we got along so good, because I was told that, sometime I was jealous of you because you got along so good with my mother. But I think she was proud. My mother-in-law was proud when I sewed and showed her what I made, and she would help with the buttonholes. And I think that made her happy because that was something she liked to do.
You included her. Yeah.
It takes doing it. It takes a lot of doing, and sometimes it doesn't work for some people. But I had made a vow, and she did speak well of me to people.
Tell us about your first home after you got married. Where did you live?
Hey, now I'm thinking about living together.
No. You and Dad, where did you live with your mother-in-law?
I want to bring out how I was adjusting to my mother-in-law.
Yeah.
Now, it's boomeranging. When I got married, I moved in with them.
Oh.
They were living on the 3rd floor on high.
2005, September the 5th. We left off the first tape where you were working at Laurelton Hall. Can you tell us about some of your co-workers and the special people you met there?
Well, one of my first experiences was as a dishwasher before I became a cook. And there were 2 ladies, Petronella and Mildred. And I sensed that they weren't too much in favor of me, and I picked up the spirit of jealousy, and really, they were really turned off on me, but I didn't do a thing. I was just a new girl, so I just prayed that it would pass, but it kept on, and finally I told a friend, Jim Mahalik, how things were going, and I was ready to tell them off, especially Petronella. And he says, reminded me how Jesus put up with things right to the end, and I should try to follow that way. So I went to work, I think it was the next day or that week, and right off the bat I was on the dishwasher machine, and I had just come in, and this her Petronella was being very nasty to me. And 2 ladies in the cafeteria overheard the way she was acting, and so when they were chatting with one of the sisters at lunchtime, they told her about it, and she was the one who hired me. So she got a hold of Petronella and talked to her in the pantry and said, Emma is worth her weight in gold, and if you don't straighten up, you're not going to have a job very long. So believe me, she straightened up and became very friendly. And I had a very good relationship with Father Del Pap. He was a young priest, and I would share with him, and we enjoyed each other's company. I would clean his apartment and do his clothes and fix his meal, fix his tray. And the janitor would say to him when we were sharing while he was getting his meal, be careful, Emma will convert you. He would say. But he liked to hear pointers, and when he liked it, he said, oh, I'm going to use that in my next sermon. And then I got acquainted with Sister Ethna. She was a sweet lady, and she had a way something like my mother-in-law. And we were very good friends, and she would putter around. And one day when I fixed a tray for Father Del Pap, he wasn't home, I noticed she took it and redid it her style. And when she corrected me about something that day, I told her what I saw her do. And she says, tee-hee-hee, tee-hee-hee. You saw me do that? And I says, yes. So it straightened out. And she used to go to night school and make hook rugs and stuff like that. And we would share, I forgot what I was going to say. She would put her in the garden, and my daughter Sue would come by with Amy, and we would visit with Sister, and she would make Irish bread. And we had a lot of good fellowship. And when she went to night school, she had a picture taken in the post, and it looked like one of those mama pictures for Mother's Day, a side view of a lady with a long skirt. And she looked something like that, and I told her she could have a photograph of that made. And so she let me have it, and I brought it to a photographer. And then one day she says, oh, I think I shouldn't have given you the picture. It was a newspaper, and it wasn't mine, so I would like it back. And I says, I just brought the film to the photographer, and it takes weeks till you get it back. But she kept pestering me every day, and one day I said, Sister, I'm getting very upset. And she says, why? And I says, because I don't have the picture. You want it back, and every day you're asking me, and it's going to be some weeks till it comes back. Oh, she said, and from then on, she didn't bother me, and when it came back, I gave it to her. And I'm sorry I didn't take addresses and keep up friendship with them. It would have been nice.
Father Del Pap.
Father Del Pap was a young priest, and he took place of the older one who left, who sat and had his meal served in the dining room. But Father Del Pap, when he came, he had to eat with the sisters in the dining room there with the sisters, and he would visit with me, and we would share. And the janitor says, watch out for Emma, you might get converted. And I left Laurelton because I met a person named Marie who was in charge of a convalescent kitchen, and she wasn't happy with the lady who became cook. She was making a mess, and she says, I'd like to hire you. And she kept after me till I quit, and then I went there. But I gotta admit, it was a real workout. But it was a learning experience too, and I met a lot of young people, and they were nice to me. One of them invited me to his wedding, and when I left, the young people made a little party for me that they thought up and gave little gifts. And that's a happy memory.
Tell you about when you retired. However, and what you were going to do. When you retired, you did a lot of senior trips.
Well, I'm trying to remember after I retired and left there, I did day trips.
You were 62.
I was 62.
Oh my goodness. I'm going to be 50.
I was kind of tired out from my cooking. There was like 119 people in the convalescent. I was so happy to survive each day.
It was
And I had to leave my house 5:30 to get to work at 6. So the night before, I would have everything ready. I wouldn't eat breakfast. I would eat breakfast at the hospital. So I would just quick get dressed, and off I'd go. And it was kind of dark in the hall, but I didn't want to put lights on and leave it all day. So I really had to hang on the railing so I would remember the last step and not step off. And so I would get there for 6 o'clock. But one time the clock stopped and I didn't know, and I was late, and they wondered if I was coming in to the kitchen. The food wasn't getting cooked. And I didn't know the clock stopped, but I couldn't get my usual program as I drove. And I didn't know the clock stopped till I got there and saw they were waiting for me.
So what did you do after you retired?
I'm thinking, what did I do after I retired? I found day trips.
Baldwin?
I went with Willie, I think, on day trips. And then I would go to Catskills with B. McCain. Every summer we would go to another Catskill resort. That was fun.
Then after you got
And after I got tired of taking trips, I got involved now at the age of 87 in Baldwin and their meals and their bingo.
quite a while you worked in the kitchen as a volunteer.
Oh, and I worked 7 years as a volunteer in the senior citizen kitchen until I had a fractured hip. And now I go there to play bingo, and I go to Lucas Gardens, I play bingo, and I go to Slim Approach, and I reached my goal many years. And then there's senior get-togethers like Happy Hearts at Calvary Church and Young at Heart at Black Rock Church. And there's a lots of good things to do. And a lot of people in the same boat, and we all enjoy each other. There's a lot there if you want to do it. All you have to do is keep your eyes open and go. And today is Labor Day weekend, September the 5th, one day after my 62nd wedding anniversary. I was married 3 o'clock in St. Paul's Church 62 years ago.
Today?
Yesterday.
Yes.
Yesterday at 3 o'clock.
Oh.
I can't believe I'm the one that's saying this. 87. And my partner, Willie, is 89. We stuck together ever since we were little shavers. And she's my best friend.
You've known her all your life.
She's my best friend, and she understands me. And we enjoy each other so much. I'm so blessed. And I hope the Lord takes me before her, because I would miss her too much.
Wow.
Do you want to say
I could ask you a question.
a question?
Well, I'm handing the microphone over to Aunt Will, and we're not sure how this is where this is gonna lead, but we'll see.
My name is Wilhelmina Schmidt. I'm also known as Willie, and also known as Aunt Minnie.
Earliest recollection of Emma.
My earliest recollection of Emma is when we lived in we lived in Stratford, and Emma got locked up in the clothes closet, and I was crying. I said, "My sister, my baby," and Ma came out to see what happened, and she found Emma was locked in the closet, and so she let her out, and so she was able to escape. And then I remember that when she was like 3 years old, I think she got onto a bicycle and she fell off it. And it seems to me that her eye got crossed at that time. And then when she was 10 years old, she had an operation on her eyes in Newark, New Jersey. And when I went up to see her, her eyes, she was bandaged up, all her eyes and her around her head, and I stood at the door and cried. I did a lot of crying. What else?
Family life, it was hard times back then. You weren't very wealthy, but you were happy.
Yeah, well, it happened when, let's see, we lived in Newark, and then we moved to Bridgeport because Wiss's was on strike, and Pa got a job at the Acme Shear. And so we stayed in Bridgeport, although we did move into Stratford and then moved back to Bridgeport. And Sister Helen was born on Booth Street in Bridgeport. And it was at that time that Pa got a job back in Wiss's. And we left for Newark, New Jersey. And my sister Helen became sick, and we lived right across the street from St. John's Lutheran Church. And Pa had the minister come over and baptize Helen because they were afraid that she was going to pass away. But she recovered, and she was healthy for a good many years until she was 72, I think, when she died from cancer. Well, I started school in Franklin School in Bridgeport, and I went there for a few months, and then we moved to Newark, New Jersey, and I went to school there until I was in the 8th grade. It was in December 27th that we moved back to Bridgeport. And then I spent my time in Barnum School, and that was like a half a year. So I started in Bridgeport, and I ended in Bridgeport in my grammar school. And we did not have our pictures taken because they expected us to go on to high school. And so right from grammar school, I went to Warren Harding High School in 1930. And it was depression. It was very hard times, and jobs were scarce, and we made it because everybody else was in the same boat. And let's see, I took the commercial course, and I could hardly wait to get out of high school to get a job. And in my last year, I counted the days till I graduated. And at the end of my high school 4 years, I couldn't get a job. And so I took a job as a waitress. I told him that I had experience, which I didn't have. And so I lasted 4 days because the man, he was a friend of the owner. He said that the work was too heavy for me, but it turned out he had a relative who was going to get a job, and so he took the job and he was a young fella, and he became a waiter. So I went to the employment office, and I applied for another job, and the manager said, you know, you're the third person I sent there. I'm never going to send anyone else there again. So then I got a job in a housekeeping job. I did the dishes. I did the laundry. I ironed, and I didn't do any heavy work. But when I went there, she said, "How much?" She said to her husband, "How much shall we pay her in Jewish?" And I smiled, and she said, "You understood what I said?" I said, "Yeah." They said, same dollar. That means $10. They were going to give me. But she said, "You understood what we said?" I said, "Yes." She said, "We'll give you $12. And so I worked there for the summer, and then Pa got me a job in Acme United. It was Acme Shear at that time. And I started at 25 cents an hour, much more than I got doing housework. And I worked for 2.5 weeks because I started in the middle of the week. And after that, I got 35 cents an hour. And gradually, as the years went by, I got raises. And I spent 46 years in Acme.
Wow.
And I retired really on September 12th, 1980. The same day that I started work at Acme 46 years ago. But I had some vacation time coming to me, so the girl had me retired as October 1st. And we had a party. They had a party for me at Three Door Restaurant, and it was a lovely affair. My whole family came, and Buddy and Bill came from New York to attend, and it was a wonderful, wonderful time. And I retired, and I lived happily ever after. Yeah, I was a Sunday school teacher for 39 years. And the year I retired from work, I decided to retire as a Sunday school teacher. One of the reasons was I didn't have the use of the copying machine, and I would make stuff on the copying machine for my class. Plus, the Sunday school had gone down quite a bit, and so I figured it's time for me to retire. So at a spaghetti dinner, they gave me a Bible and some other gifts in remembrance of these days in Sunday school.
So how old were you when you retired?
64. I was 64 years old. Yeah. And I also worked in the altar guild, fixing the altar, and I did that for many years. And let's see, and what else? Oh, and in my later years, I became a communion giver to shut-ins of the church, and I had one person that I would give communion to once a month, and that continued until I could no longer do it, when I couldn't get to church anymore. And uh, wha- what? Yeah, your mother was very kind and let me wear her wedding gown. It was a lovely satin gown with beads going down the front. It was a little bit short on me, so Emma made a ruffle on the bottom, so it fit me perfect. And we had we were married in St. Paul's Lutheran Church on Harriet Street, and we had the reception at Mary Journey's Inn. And then we went on our honeymoon. Uh, we stopped in a hotel in New Haven. I think it was the Hotel Taft. And the following day, we started on our honeymoon, and we went to Canada. We went to Montreal and saw all the sights there, and went up to Mount Royal in a horse and buggy carriage, and we went to the top, and then we went down, and then when we got out of the carriage, Lou said how much, and the fella said $10, and so he paid him the $10, and then we went off to something else.
How did you meet?
Well,
How old were you?
I was 30 years old.
Oh.
30. In 1946. And Lou's brother, Bill Schmidt, went to St. Paul's Church. And so one day he invited me to dinner at his house. And I said, gee, I'm sorry I can't go. My parents went to a funeral out of town, and I have to take care of my brother and sister. So he said, we'll make it some other day. So a few weeks later, he invited me again, and I went. And then I met Lou, and from that day on, I saw him steady. I saw him every weekend because he lived in and worked in Middletown. And then work got slow, and so he came to Bridgeport looking for work. He went to Stratford to Sikorsky Aircraft, and he got a job there. And so we got married the following year, August 23rd, 1947. And that was a joyous day.
Who was in your wedding? You remember their name?
Yeah, it was Martha Zablowski. She went to St. Paul's. And Wilma Nettleton, she was my matron of honor, and Martha was my maid of honor. I had two attendants.
Yeah.
And Lou had his brother Bill for best man, his youngest brother Ed, and Wilma Wolfram Nettleton's husband as the third usher. Yeah.
There's home.
Well, before we were married, Lou heard of this house from Bill, his brother Bill, that was going to be sold. A neighbor of his owned the house on Grant Street, and she was going to sell the house. And so Lou he went to see the house, and he decided to buy it. So he bought the house. I guess it was in early 47. And when we got married, he asked the people on the second floor to move. So we had to wait for them to find an apartment. And rooms were hard to find then because it was right after the war and all the GIs were looking for apartments. Well, finally, in the following, so in the meantime, we lived at East Main Street where I lived when I was single, and we had the front bedroom for ours. And then in August the following year, we were able to get into the house on the second floor. A young couple with a baby boy, and a couple on the third floor, a man and a girl and her husband. Yeah, everybody was married in those days when they lived together.
So how long do you live in the second floor?
We lived there until my brother, I think he was in the 8th grade, and then the people on the first floor moved out, and I told Wilma that my mother was going to move into the house, and she thought that was a good idea because Pa died the year after I got married in 48. He got married? Yeah.
Oh, 48.
Yeah. And it was just then in 48. And then this couple moved out of the house, and Bobby and Ruth and my mother moved into the second floor, and we moved into the first floor. And so I just loved that house. And on the third floor, you could see all over Bridgeport. It was on the top of the hill, well, halfway up the hill, and you could see all over, and it was quite a sight. Yeah.
Going to East Main Street, years old.
Oh.
And I remember going there because my father.
Yeah. Yeah.
I remember that.
Oh.
Not many, at that age, things that you remember, but I remember 4 years old.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And shortly after that, he died.
He died.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't remember on the second floor. I didn't.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I just remember.
We lived there first. We
Yeah.
lived on the first.
I didn't realize that.
Yeah. And we moved to the first floor. And then we had another tenant, Creighton, Tom and Barbara Creighton. They were a very lovely couple. And then they bought a house, and they moved to Milford, and they invited Lou and me to visit them one time. And they said, we spend more on gas, on oil, than we paid rent in your house. And then after that, when she moved, her sister and her husband moved in. And then they lived there for a while, and then they bought a house in Stratford on Cut Spring Road. And, on Anson Street, the same street Ruth lived on the opposite side, a couple houses down from where they lived. And what else? And then Doris and Charlie moved into the apartment. And Doris worked as a nurse in Bridgeport Hospital, and she worked there hard, and I remember her mother-in-law was having a baby September 6th.
Labor Day weekend.
Oh, and so she was having a baby, and Doris was her nurse. And shortly after that, Doris's daughter Mary was born, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The following May.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so the two girls were related, and Hopi was Mary's aunt.
Yeah. She wasn't that much older.
Yeah, she was just a half a year or so older.
Yeah.
And so Mary had her call her Aunt Hope. I don't know if she did though.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was cute.
Yeah.
So you lived on Grant Street for how long?
I think we lived there 20 years.
And then you
Yeah.
had to move because
Yeah.
why?
We had to move because they were taking the whole block for a mental hospital on Central Avenue, and they needed parking and room to play tennis and stuff like that. So they took the whole block, Grand Street Central, and then the side street, and then Sheridan Street Extension. They took all the houses. And we were sad about moving, but someone said, don't feel bad. The neighborhood is going to change. And it changed.
Now.
Yeah.
So you moved to Stratford.
Yeah, we moved to 140 Disbrow Street, and we bought a 3-family house. And Doris and Charlie and Mary moved on to the 2nd floor. And then when we finished renovating the 1st floor, Lou and I and Ma moved into the 1st floor. Ma had the apartment on the 2nd floor on Grand Street, but then she decided that she would move in with us on Disbrow Street.
After us?
Oh, yeah. It was Doris and Charlie, Alice and Bill, Carl, and Jackie, and Lisa. I don't know if she was born there. She was born there, I think. Lisa.
Oh.
Yeah. And Lisa, and then Mark, and Sandy.
Yeah.
And then Mark and Sandy moved out because they needed more room. One of Sandy's sisters got divorced, and she had to have a place to stay. So they gave up their apartment on Grant Street and moved into Main Street, a couple of blocks away, near the, it's close to the Rotary on Barnum Avenue, and so they moved in the house there.
And Buddy lived there.
Oh yeah, Buddy lived there on the 3rd floor. He had 2 rooms, and I had 1 room full of valuables. Yeah, and he lived there for a short time. Then he moved to New York.
Okay.
Yeah.
Then for a while you didn't have, and then was it safe?
Then Lou died. The apartment on the 2nd floor was empty for about 10 years. And then Lou died. And before he died, he said, rent the second floor. And so Nancy and Mike need an apartment.
Oh, yeah.
And so they took the apartment. And they lived there for a few years.
Yeah,
And they had Sarah,
yeah. They just
Uh,
had Sarah.
just Sarah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then Nancy took care of another little girl,
Yeah.
Rachel, and she was about the same age as Sarah.
Yeah.
So they were great company for each other. And then after they moved out, Faith and Joshua moved in with little baby Joshua. But that marriage, then they were married after that. And after that, that
After she
uh,
left, lived with
they
Alice.
they were married, and then they separated company, and Faith lived alone, and she was very sad all the time, and tried to make some happiness happen to her. And in the meantime, she had another baby, Jeremy, and I don't remember whether he was born before she was married. He was just a little baby when they were married. And so they were two adorable children, Joshua and Jeremy. And Jeremy loved his mother, and when she would take Joshua to school, Jeremy would cry. So one day, I cried too. I pretended to cry, and so he looked at me, and I think he continued then crying. But anyway, Faith came back pretty quick, so everything turned out all right.
While Faith went to live with us,
Ah.
and then Betsy went
Ah.
so she took the apartment.
Yeah. Faith moved out like in December, and then Betsy and Kevin started to clean up the apartment and do things. And then they moved in, I guess in February.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They had another apartment.
They lived in a Pinewood Lake.
Yeah.
Yeah. They had a small little house there.
Yeah.
And they paid $1,000 a month rent.
Yeah.
And so they moved to Disbro Street. And they're there now.
Yeah.
And Kevin is a student minister in Calvary Church. And Betsy is a nurse in St. Vincent's. And she's going to school to become an RN, a registered nurse. And I hope she gets to be one, because she studies hard.
Pretty soon.
Yeah,
Pretty soon. That's right.
yeah. So with that, happy memories and happy day.
Yeah.
And it was nice recording this. So long.